to teach PE or else history. I have two sisters. Now one of them's older, and one of them's below me.
Well, my father is very strict, and he is a very strong personality type of person, and he, if I have to talk to him, it just scares me that I stutter very much.
My name is John Eaton, and I think he's the greatest guy in the world. Right now he's going for his teacher's credential. He's going for a teacher's credential at Loyola, and in the summer he'll be going into the Air Force, and he'll probably be flying planes, and he's looking forward to it a lot. I like him. I've always liked him because he's about 5'10". He's my ideal man. He's about 5'10". He has a little boy look to him. He's just darling. His ears kind of protrude just a little bit, but I mean, it just makes him, you know. And the only bad thing about it is that he's going bald already at 22, and he's kind of embarrassed about it at times.
What you have just seen are some examples of the problem called stuttering, which affects over 1 million Americans. I am Dr. Joseph Sheehan, professor of psychology, UCLA. At one time, I stuttered as severely as any of those you just heard. For several years, I have specialized on the problem of stuttering both in research and therapy. Mr. Bob Gladstone, the producer of this show, is going to ask me some of the questions commonly raised about stuttering.
Dr. Sheehan, just what is stuttering? How is it different from stammering?
Stuttering and stammering are really two names for the same disorder. Stuttering is a problem involving communication. It is a hesitancy. We all stutter a little bit at times, but a person who stutters or becomes a stutterer develops a fear or an apprehension, an anxiety. There are elements of conflict in it. He wants to go ahead and speak, but he holds back because of fear. And this fear seems to relate to how he feels toward himself and how he feels toward the other person.
Is this a surface problem, or does it go deeper than what it appears to be?
The major part of it is really underneath the surface. That is, the person feels fear, shame, guilt, tension. He's always worried about what might happen. He might get into a situation, not be able to say his name, or the telephone rings and he can't answer it. And in this way, stuttering is like an iceberg. The part that you see is really the smaller part. The larger part to the stutterer himself is all the emotional load that he has to carry along with him at all times.
Have there been many famous personalities who have had this problem?
Yes, Moses and Demosthenes, who overcompensated by becoming a famous orator. He spoke with pebbles in his mouth, spoke above the ocean's roar. Charles Lamb, a writer, compensated in a different way. So did Somerset Maugham, Charles Darwin, and some actors have been stutterers too.
We have a, excuse me, a videotape that we recorded previously indicating this so-called role playing and its effect on the stutterer.
Let's take a look at this one right now. Do you usually have trouble saying your name, Maureen? Would you if you introduced yourself right now?
Yes, I would. Maureen Brindley is my name.
What about if you take the role of somebody else or assume an accent? Did you ever try that?
Yeah, man, in high school I assumed many accents. Let me tell you, sometime I was a good Negro, and other times I'd be a very precise lady in a play. And other times, too, I just try to talk to people in a rhythmatic type of thing. And I would do things or laugh or try to be unnatural. And then I'd start my accent again, and boy, I just never had any trouble at all.
That was very interesting, Dr. Sheehan. Is this technique of role-playing ever used as part of your therapy training?
It is not really a sufficient therapy in itself. It is better for the stutterer to accept himself rather than to try to be somebody else. We have examples of people trying to enact false roles, but this is really part of the stutterer's problem. It's a false role disorder. The stutterer needs to follow the motto of "to thine own self be true." The stutterer builds up a lot of tension because he tries to pretend that he doesn't have the problem of stuttering. He tries to pretend that nothing is happening, and he gets very skillful in enlisting the listener in keeping up this pretense. It's what we call a baby hippopotamus effect. Suppose that we had on this table between us a baby hippopotamus, and we had an agreement that we would talk as though it weren't there. Well, stuttering is something like that, and there's this pretense, this fiction that nothing is happening, that the stutterer gets very skillful at enacting. But it isn't really a sufficient therapy to take roles or be somebody else. You have to learn and go through life being yourself.
Before we actually get into the therapy itself, could you answer this question? What actually is it that causes stuttering?
Stuttering is a fear problem. It is a self-role conflict, also called an approach avoidance conflict. You have something to express, but you hold back, as I indicated earlier. There seem to be levels of this conflict. There seem to be a great many different kinds of personalities who stutter, so that we can't say, really, that there is a single unitary cause of stuttering. There seem to be different routes to becoming a stutterer, and possibly different routes toward recovery also.
You indicated earlier that there are methods like the role-taking that would help the stutterer to at least appear for the moment to be over his problem. Again, we have a videotape of a group involved in choral speaking. Before we look at it, though, would you care to say a little bit about this?
Yes.
And why it works?
Yes. What you're going to see are two stutterers reading together after they read separately, and when they read together, they're doing something very different. When they read separately, they're speaking as themselves, and their own separate identities become involved. Their feelings about themselves as individuals are involved.
And they stutter.
And in that situation, they stutter. Then you dissolve their separate identities into a duet, so that now you have a dyad or a group, and you don't have the same situation at all. And when the stutterer is able to lose his identity problems, is concerned about himself, then he can speak quite fluently. Let's take a look at it. Would you introduce yourself and then read this passage from here down to here?
Yes, sir. Al Packle is my name. When you think of Washington, it can be its distinguished street design, its sweeping malls, its stately buildings, its history.
Okay. Would you step back just a minute? Now, would you do the same? Introduce yourself and then read this.
Thomas Alexander. When you think of Washington, it can be its distinguished street design, its sweeping malls, its stately buildings, its history.
Now, would you stay right there, and could you come back in, and would you merge into a duet? I'll begin with you, and let's read this together and stay together all the way down, beyond this point down to here. All right, let's try it. When
you think of Washington,
it can
be its distinguished street design, its sweeping malls, its stately buildings, its history. When you think of Washington, it can be of the capital of the free world, and its influence and presence in every government.
Yeah, that was really amazing. Does the stutterer always stutter? Are there times when he doesn't, separate and apart from an incident like the role playing or the choral speaking?
One of the interesting things about stuttering is that the stutterer speaks fluently most of the time. And he is most likely to stutter when he has something important to say to someone who is important. That is, you are more likely to stutter in crucial situations and when you're communicating a lot, when there's a lot of emotional loading to what you're saying. If a situation doesn't matter very much, or if you're not really communicating, or if there's some distraction present, then you can often speak quite easily. For example, most, not all, but most stutterers can sing quite fluently, and here's one who illustrates the contrast between her speaking and her singing. Let's take a look at that.
You were telling me that you could sometimes sing a song without stuttering, Sandy. I wonder if you could introduce yourself and tell 2 or 3 things about yourself, and then give us your song.
Sandy Hogan is my name, and I've stuttered all my life. I'm a student at UCLA. Freshman. So I'll now. Edelweiss, every morning you greet me, small and white, clean and bright, you look happy to meet me.
Not every stutterer is able to sing fluently. For example, when I was in college, I once tried to sing Old Lang Syne and could never get past the second word. Started in should old acquaintance, and I made a recording in which I had a very long block on this. So it's not invariable. It illustrates something about stuttering, that there's a lot of diversity in it.
I'm glad to see you can smile about it. I imagine that stuttering must be the butt of many jokes. I know that Porky Pig cartoon, for example, it was a play on stuttering, and apparently was quite successful and funny to a lot of people. How would the average stutterer, how would you as a stutterer have responded to that kind of humor?
At one time, like most stutterers, those things bothered me very much. Stuttering is a peculiar mixture of comedy and tragedy, and sometimes people laugh because they don't know what else to do. It's like Voltaire used to say of the French, they laugh in order not to cry. And laughing can be a defense both for the stutterer and for the listener. Most stutterers have avoided any humor reference. It's usually a taboo subject. And in the later stages of therapy, we try to help the stutterer appreciate what most people appreciate. That is that beyond the tragedy and the immediate fear and tension, there is a lighter side of stuttering.
Do you have any examples of some of the stuttering jokes?
Yes, one of the examples, for example, is the 2 lumberjacks. One of them was going to call to the other one, and so he says timber, and you can see what this time pressure, which is a very important element in stuttering, can do. Another example along the same lines is the fellow who stuttered so severely that he wasn't able to get a job, and finally took a job as a helper on a rather third-rate ship, and about the second day out at sea, he came up to the captain and started to say, "Captain, captain." And the captain, who was a very severe fellow, said, "Oh, if you can't talk any better than that, go on back below." So the fellow went on back below, and he made about 4 or 5 further efforts over the next half hour. And finally, on about the 6th effort, the captain said, "Well, if you can't say it, why don't you sing it? Sing it then." And so the fellow sang, "Should old acquaintance be forgotten, never brought to mind, the cook has fallen overboard, he's 40 miles behind." You see, I've progressed to the point where I can sing "Should old acquaintance be forgot" without having that much trouble. There was also the story which illustrates the peculiar, unexpected fluency sometimes of stuttering. Also illustrates role-taking, that of a stutterer who came into a bar and said, give me a dry martini. And the bartender said, one dry martini coming up. As the stutterer was sipping his dry martini, another customer came in and said, I'll have an old-fashioned. And the bartender said, one old-fashioned coming up. So the first fellow in, the stutterer, was pretty annoyed and said to the bartender, say, bartender, what do you mean by mimicking me? And the bartender said, oh, I wasn't mimicking you. I really stutter. I was just mimicking him. The role of role in stuttering is just astonishing enough so that could happen.
What do we know about stuttering, though? When does it start, for example?
It starts in childhood, usually about the age of 2 or 3 or 4. About 4 out of 5 of those who develop the problem of stuttering and are diagnosed and become a source of concern for the parents seem to undergo a spontaneous recovery from stuttering. Most parents and most people give rather bad advice about what to do when the child begins to show some symptoms of stuttering.
Does this, the symptom of stuttering, if you can call it a symptom, does it run in families, or is it, do you find it in certain ethnic groups or in certain parts of the world?
Yes, some of the other really solidly established facts we have on stuttering involve the fact that stuttering does run in families, not on a hereditary or genetic basis necessarily, because other things run in families like money and ways of handling children run in families. Stuttering is distributed all over the world. I traveled through Africa trying to interview every native African who could speak enough English to speak with me, and found that every African that I could encounter knew a word for stuttering in his native tribal tongue, knew the problem, and often had some psychological theories concerning it. So it's a problem that's distributed all over the world. We know that it exists in Asia, and it seems to be a rather universal problem.
You had mentioned to me on a previous occasion that the etymology of this was quite unique. That what was it you said about all the words?
Oh, yes. The words for stuttering tend to be onomatopoeic. That is, they tend to sound like stuttering. In addition to our own English word, stuttering, which sounds a little like it, you have the Kikuyu word for stuttering. The Kikuyu are a tribe from which the Mau Mau developed. This is a tribe in Kenya. The Kikuyu word for stuttering is kuhinda hinda, which means literally stuck in the tongue. The Dongala tribe of the Sudan used the word tamtama, and other peoples throughout the world use these onomatopoeic words for stuttering.
Does the problem concern itself primarily with men or women or boys or girls, or is there have you found that there's a definite distribution of?
There's a very definite distribution of stuttering as to the sex ratio. It is a problem about 4 or 5 times more common in males than in females. One researcher tried to explore this problem by exploring the rate of mandibular movement, comparing males and females, and found that females were a little superior. That is, they could waggle their jaws a little faster. I doubt that that's a very serious answer to it. Nearly everything that shouldn't happen, that's biologically unfortunate, tends to happen to males more than females.
Did I ask you when it manifests itself, at what age?
It has its peak onset between the ages of 3 and 7, and it tends to begin about the time of the child's putting words into sentences. Also, many cases of stuttering seem to have their onset in school, and the recovery, if it is going to occur, tends to occur during puberty or during late adolescence.
Is the problem complicated by the parent's attempt to help?
Yes, yes, it is. Very often the parent is badly advised and doesn't know what to do. For most of us, if we stumble on a word as we do, we try it again, or we stop and take a deep breath, and it works all right. But this is often not very good advice for a stutterer. If you ask the child to stop and think what you have to say and take a deep breath and speak again, then you're saying to him, your way of speaking isn't acceptable. I don't like the way you're talking. And you're also saying, talking is a difficult thing. You better work hard to do it. and the stutterer can develop tensions, and he begins to force and struggle, and this forcing and struggling seems to lead to a vicious circle, that the stutterer tries very hard to keep from stuttering, and in those situations in which he tries hard to keep from stuttering, he's most likely to stutter. Stuttering is something in a way that you do because you try hard to keep from doing it. It's a classic kind of vicious circle.
What is the likelihood that being in the presence of stutterers, if, well, myself, for example, if I did not stutter, but I was in the presence of stutterers, could it happen to me?
No, it really wouldn't happen to you. What could happen to you is that you would begin to listen to yourself more, you would begin to monitor yourself more, and you would begin to realize that your own speech, like that of any other normal speaker, contains a great many bobbles and hesitations and interruptions. Most of us take these for granted and accept them very comfortably. The stutterer, though, has the feeling that he must speak perfectly, and so he's constantly straining not to stutter, and this is a big source of problem for the stutterer.
What about cures? Are there any quick cures?
There are no quick cures, although the variation of stuttering tempts some stutterers to hope that he can get a magic release by next Tuesday. He'll be speaking as a silver-tongued orator. The Demosthenes story maybe perpetuates this legend. Sometimes the stutterer can feel like a giant in chains. That is, the stuttering becomes a peg on which to hang all his shortcomings. And if only he could get rid of that problem, then everything else would be fine. It's like the stutterer who felt that he wasn't popular because he stuttered. He got over it, and he found his friends didn't like him anyway. The search for a magic cure is almost universal. Hypnosis is one of the favorite, apparently magic kind of cures, because some stutterers under suggestion can temporarily speak more fluently. But hypnosis has been thoroughly explored as a therapy for stutterers and found wanting.
What about drugs or even alcohol?
Drugs, the tranquilizers and the hallucinants have been tried out with stuttering, and they don't produce any permanent effect. In fact, they hardly produce a discernible effect. In one of the better controlled studies, the only thing that really worked was the placebo. It was the sugar pill. Alcohol has an interesting effect on stuttering. It is said that the superego is the only part of the personality soluble in alcohol. Alcohol seems to be one of the most ancient tranquilizers, and also relates the use of alcohol, which does seem to produce quite a bit of fluency, only temporarily in some stutters, seems to relate to a temporary false increase in self-esteem. We have this expression, feeling high. A great many stutterers can take a few drinks and lose themselves. They dissolve their identities, perhaps. That's another way of saying it. Or they feel high.
In effect, it's assuming another role, then.
It's assuming another role. Stuttering is a status gap problem. You stutter depending on your own perceived status compared to that of the listener. If I were talking up to you, I would have more trouble. The average stutterer, the average child who begins to stutter, is speaking upward all the time. In practically everybody in his environment has more authority than he has, and status, authority is often shown in a vertical dimension. To have to speak up to an authority figure is a very difficult problem for stutterers, and currently 2 colleagues and I are publishing an article on showing the effect of status on stuttering, in which you stutter more to professors than you do to fellow students if you're a student who stutters. And there's a great many other research studies. We're constantly trying to discover more about the problem of stuttering.
Is there any validity to the idea that perhaps a stutterer would be more likely to become an alcoholic once he discovers that this is a way out?
I haven't really encountered too many stutterers who have tried that solution. Maybe if the solution works, they would never get to me. This is one of the problems, of course. You sit in a clinic, in a research laboratory, and there is a self-selection of those who come to you. And we're just beginning to find out about the problem in those who don't seek therapy, or who become discouraged, don't seek therapy.
Has anything been done in surgery?
Historically, there was a surgical fad about 100 years ago, a little bit more than that, of the surgical mutilation of the tongue, and there are articles on this, and they would cut the frenum, the cord under the tongue, or take out a wedge, and there is no validity whatever in this approach, and this was, it was found that the person still stuttered but with a mutilated tongue, and that was hastily abandoned. And there are no shortcuts. It's a problem that takes a while to develop. It's a problem that makes its onset in early childhood, and it takes a while for the treatment. We have discovered that the spontaneous recoveries, those that occur without treatment, and also the recoveries that occur with treatment, take time. It takes time to change if you're making very fundamental changes in the self. We include in the treatment self-acceptance, acceptance of one's role as a stutterer, giving up the pretense, not enacting false roles, going out and speaking in situations that are feared even though you stutter in them. We use group therapy, some individual therapy. There's a great deal of self-direction in therapy for stuttering. It's a role-taking psychotherapy. It's an active doing therapy. As a stutterer, you're changed by what you do, not so much by what you talk about or think about or write about. It's not an insight therapy, although sometimes supplementary insight-oriented psychotherapy can be helpful. But it's primarily a doing therapy. You're changed by experience, by doing things.
Dr. Sheehan, in a previous tape recording that we made, we demonstrated the so-called masking symptom. Would you describe that?
This is another interesting experimental effect. If the stutterer hears white noise or some other masking noise at a loud intensity, he speaks fluently for a time. It's an interesting experimental effect, which we might...
Yes, I'd like to. In this demonstration, the earphones on the subject contain this white noise, which is what? Just
it's just a very loud sound of all the different available frequencies.
And it precludes her hearing herself, is that?
That's right. You get such an intensive amplification of the ear-conducted noise that you don't get the bone conduction. As we speak, we monitor ourselves constantly, and you change the monitoring. This is one of the speculations as to why this effect works.
Let's look at that.
The mind and eyes of Western man have accepted and often assimilated the ideas and cultural expressions of the non-Western world. His architecture and his foodstuffs, his chessboard and his card games, the textile designs of his clothing, the art objects in his home, in his museums, his sleek office buildings. Are visible evidence that
that certainly is the most dramatic example so far, I think. I've heard it said that a stutterer should take a deep breath. Perhaps this is the advice that's given to them by their friends and relatives. Is this good advice? Does it work?
No, it's very bad advice. It's advice first offered by an Arabian philosopher of the 10th century named Avicenna, and it's advice that's failed for 1,000 years. What the advice tends to produce is a temporary fluency and a distraction. That is, the person will do, he will do this, he will speak more fluently. For example, if his name is John, he started out saying, "My name is John." Somebody tells him to stop and take a deep breath. The first effect you get is this: "My name is John," because it's a novelty, it's a distraction, and it seems to work. And this is very insidious because it depends upon newness. Then as you continue to do it, you begin to add in the deep breath, and breathing is readily conditioned. It also changes in breathing are responsive to fear, so that you eventually get a pattern like this. "My name is John." And this is one of the ways that stuttering builds up and develops. There's a learned behavior aspect of stuttering. There's a habit part as well as the attitude part that we've been talking about so far.
This is a very painful experience for most non-stutterers when they're confronted with a stutterer who is obviously going through contortions and difficulty getting out a word. What should that non-stutterer do? How can he help? What should he not do?
The listener is, as you say, in a conflict too. He's very uncertain about what to do. He doesn't know what his role is either. And the listener who tries to help the stutter out is probably making a mistake. Most of us like to talk. Even if you stutter, you still like to talk. And it's better to let the stutter finish his own words, even if he seems to be floundering a lot. Otherwise, you may supply the wrong word, or throw the stutterer off, or say to him, you seem to be so helpless you can't even speak for yourself, I'll speak for you. So then you can also get into kind of a guessing game. If the stutterer is trying to say the color green, and the listener's trying to say blue, red, orange, and you can get chaos from that. It's better to be matter of fact and to be accepting and to reduce time pressure. Time pressure is a very big element in stuttering. The stutterer tends to feel insecure enough about himself and about his role so that he puts himself under time pressure. He feels he's got to rush, and the internal time pressure set probably trips him up a great deal.
You said earlier that stuttering is caused by a self-role conflict. Can I interpret that to mean that if a stutterer is not himself, that perhaps he won't stutter?
On a temporary basis, he can speak fluently by getting away from himself. And some of the old distraction therapies were based upon that. But that's no permanent solution to the problem. We have had examples of actors. Gary Moore, for example, was a successful actor even at a time when he stuttered. Jack Parr used to be a stutterer. Marilyn Monroe was a stutterer. When you take a role and are somebody else, you seem to be able to speak more fluently. We had one actor who could run children's puppet shows, and he could take all the voices of all the different puppet characters. And he got along very well until he began to study the Stanislavski School of Acting, which emphasized acting from yourself. And when he had to take a role as an anxious, expectant father with the line, "I have a defect," he thought of his own defect, stuttering, and he stuttered. So that you can't spend the rest of your life being somebody else. You have to become yourself. And in therapy, we try to study these false roles and help the stutterer to reject them and to be himself and to learn to speak more easily and indeed to stutter more easily as himself. Sometimes it's useful for the stutterer to stutter on purpose or to stutter in an easier way. There are a lot of different ways of stuttering, a lot of different styles, and you can adopt a role as which is based upon an acceptance of yourself, which also involves stuttering very easily. For instance, on the word stuttering. I stuttered on that word just then. At one time, I would have grimaced and did some of the things that the people you saw earlier were doing. But I still stutter. I think of myself as a stutterer, but I am very comfortable and self-accepting in it. I think every stutterer has to work out his own acceptance of self and has to pick from the smorgasbord of what we offer in therapy a way of being himself and being a stutterer to the extent that he still is one, and speaking comfortably and stuttering comfortably and being open, and to reject all the false role-playing, because stuttering is in many ways a false role disorder. Without the false roles, you don't have much left to stutter about.
I recall a story, perhaps even you told it to me, about a young man who stuttered badly and then found that if he could adapt an accent, I believe it was an Irish accent, he went around and he never stuttered anymore because he was very fluent until this character that he had created became so much a part of him that he was stuttering in his brogue and had to go on to Cockney or something else.
Exactly, exactly. And many stutterers have gone through a procession of different characters, and you use these different accents. And this shows why you have to accept yourself. You can't really get away from yourself.
Where would a stutterer go to find help?
A college or university speech clinic, speech and hearing clinic, is often the best source of help. The public school therapy offers some help to stutterers. There are some public school therapists who specialize in stuttering and do an effective job of it. Others specialize in other disorders. But any public school therapist or any member of the American Speech and Hearing Association can usually help a stutterer find help.
Let us now join a stuttering group in session. These people are in the early stages of group therapy, one of many meetings in which they will gain the confidence and self-assurance that is such an important factor in the successful treatment of stuttering.
And you've already made a lot of changes. You used to be a very severe stutterer, indeed, and I wonder what some of your goals are now. Before you state them, I wonder if you could give us a sample of what your stuttering was like. So we have members of the group here who are in different stages, and you've been working on your speech quite a long time and started from way back.
I will I will be glad to, Dr. Sheehan. Leonard Robin is the way I used to stutter. I haven't been doing that for quite some time. There have been a number of advantages to not doing that, one of which is my neck muscles have gotten smaller, and so I've been able to also now wear a smaller shirt size. As you spoke of the Iceberg, Dr. Sheehan, I think this is extremely important because I find if I am not working on my stuttering and going out and meeting people and talking with people, this iceberg is sort of a floating thing. And if I really am not actively trying to work on my stuttering, the iceberg begins to sink lower and lower and lower. And the only way I can bring it up to the surface is to get out and really talk to people and really go into as many difficult, challenging situations as I can find.
You find that actually getting out and talking to people, talking more and to more people really helps you.
Oh yes, it not only helps me there, it also helps me to be more accepted as a member of many groups. I still find, though, that I have more trouble when I get into a group with very fluent people who are constantly interrupting and trying to compete with these fluent people in a very verbal situation is difficult for me.
To try to get the floor to hold it.
Right, right. It's very hard.
Yeah. And people will put you under time pressure, too. They won't really wait. Everybody talks in this world of ours, and very few people listen.
Right.
If they do listen, they listen impatiently, waiting to speak.
One of the situations that has always given me the problem of the time pressure situation is the telephone, of picking up the telephone receiver and trying to say hello and taking so much time to say the word, whereas some people would hang up. And it's very embarrassing and very discouraging.
You've had people hang up on you then, hmm?
Yes, I have.
One thing that makes me sort of unhappy is when I call another stutterer who has been working on his stuttering or has not been working on his stuttering, and he does not say hello on the telephone. I don't care how long it takes, but it really makes me unhappy when he says yes in a very glib way.
I agree. I used to say yes, too. It's a miserable thing to do.
So did I.
Biggest crutch in the world.
I've done that, too, or else he just uses a silent block. You know, this gag about if you call on the phone and nobody answers, don't hang up, that's me. Sometimes people recognize us on the phone immediately because they can hear some stuttering sounds. Ever had that happen to you?
Yes.
Say hello, Steve.
I remember I could never say hello on the phone also, and so what I did was make it a lot harder for myself. I made up, I said, Twin Leaf residence, morning speaking, 8416 McConnell Avenue. Because I couldn't say hello, but I could say that.
That is, you took the role of somebody more official.
Yes.
You weren't being yourself.
Right, and I could say that perfectly, but I couldn't say, just pick up the phone and say hello.
Have you ever done that in other ways, taken a role to try to be somebody other than yourself in order to speak more easily, more fluently, for the time being?
Oh, I've done it many a time. Like in high school, I was on the speech and debate team, and I gave an original oratory in front of a contest, and I got an award in it. I didn't have any trouble at all speaking because I was in a position of authority, and I wasn't myself speaking. I was maybe an actor in front of a group. I don't know what I considered myself, but I know I didn't think
You
of
found
myself.
if you get away from yourself, you could be fluent. I did that once in high school, took a role as foreman of the jury, And all those who knew me thought the verdict would never be delivered, but somehow as foreman of the jury, I wasn't myself, and I was able to deliver that one very easily. What if some of you have had other experiences of...
I was installed one time when I was in high school as the president of an organization, and there was quite a large gathering, and at the installation I was perfectly fluent, had no problems at all, and then the next week there was a somewhat the same thing, and I went up and it was just the opposite. It was completely the opposite. Everything that had previously been fluent was just a jumble of stuttering and holding back. And
isn't that the trouble with this playing false roles, that it all catches up with you, that you can pretend to be somebody else for a while, but there comes a time when you get close to yourself in those same roles. It's like other tricks or crutches. I wonder if you might mention some of the other tricks or crutches that you've used to cover up stuttering, some of the things submerged down in that iceberg. For example, I used to substitute words, or I'd pretend to think sometimes, or change an entire sentence around. Those used to be some of my crutches.
One crutch that I used to use, I live in La Jolla, and at that time, somebody asked me where I lived, and I used to say I lived in a city down by the beach near San Diego. Never to say where I lived, always to describe it, because it was so difficult to say La Jolla.
It was actually, rather than to say this short little phrase, La Jolla, it was easier to say these 2 or 3 long phrases that somehow avoided the key word you're having trouble with.
That's right.
You could anticipate then. You could actually tell in advance that you're going to stutter on that word. You anticipate and then avoid. Take a detour, huh?
Exactly.
One crutch I used to use is I used to take my 2 fingers and put them together and go like that in order to push out the words. This worked pretty well for a time, but after a while I was pushing my fingers together 2 and 3 and 4 times just to say a single word. And I finally decided to break this habit because my 2 fingers were getting so bloody that and it was getting quite painful at the same time.
You saw that sign language is no answer
No,
to
it is
stutter,
not.
huh? Okay. Well, what are some of your crutches, Andy?
Once, while I was in Spanish class, a friend of mine would sit behind me, and when I was called on, and I had a block, she would tap the back of my seat 3 times, and I'd say it. Big help.
That is, she was providing you a distraction.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't go around with somebody
No,
tapping you
it didn't
3
work
times.
for long.
It's only temporary, isn't that the way you found distractions? It's not usually what happens. Depends on novelty that wears off.
one of my crutches was that I'd never keep eye contact with anybody, whether I was fluent or having a block, and I'd also blink my eyes as a way of releasing the words. And I trust that I've overcome that by now, at least large part of it.
Have you found that monitoring, that keeping exact track of what it is you do when you stutter really begins to help? That is, one reason that you stutter as you do is that it's become habituated and you don't know exactly what it is you do when you stutter. And it's unpleasant, so we cut off the feedback. We don't really listen to ourselves. We don't really look at it. And we hide up we hide the stuttering. We cover it up from others, but also, most of all, from ourselves. We fool ourselves about stuttering. And to take a pretty good look at it just within yourself, have you found that to be helpful? Maybe to do as you're doing right now, to take an inventory of crutches. Is there such a thing as a complete cure for stuttering? If by complete cure you mean that the individual will never hesitate again, that's impossible because that's part of normal speech. But if by complete cure you mean overcoming the handicap, then it's possible, and a great many people have done it. Here is one, and I'm going to put the pressure on him by asking him to introduce himself, to say his own name, which is often very hard for a stutterer.
My name is Jim Sheldon, and I've been working with Dr. Sheehan for about 2 years now.
I wonder if you'd give us an example of your old pattern of stuttering. As of about 2 years ago, how might you have stuttered, Jim?
Well, I think I can do that very readily. If I was going to say, my name is Jim Sheldon.
Can you feel some of the old tension coming back as you do that?
I certainly can.
Now, you've gone out into situations and done a great many different things, and I wonder if you would tell us about one of them, which is one of the more dramatic things you've done, that is to join the Toastmasters Club. Can you tell us about that?
I'd like to very much. I've been a member of Toastmasters for approximately a year now, and I think that it has probably made has been more help to me than any other thing that I could have done, because it gave me the necessary challenge that I needed.
But what have you done? What have you done in Toastmasters and in general? What have you done about your stuttering?
I've just tried to be more open about it, and at this point I can improve on the finer points of speaking now, but the fact of being open, not substituting words, being very straightforward, has really helped me more than anything.
Can you give us an example of one of your talks at the Toastmasters Club? Not to go through the whole talk, but just how you might approach it.
Yes, I would come up to the lectern, acknowledge my introduction from the Toastmaster, and begin like this. Fellow Toastmasters, what I am going to speak to you about tonight concerns all of us here.
All right, that's fine. That's a very good example. What advice would you have for a stutterer who couldn't get therapy? What sort of philosophy have you found useful for a stutterer in your own experience?
I think the most important thing would be not to avoid a situation just for the sake of getting around any stuttering. When you avoid, you're not doing yourself any good, and I think that being straightforward and open is the only way to do it.
How comfortable are you about your speaking now? How do you feel about yourself as a speaker?
I feel much better now as a speaker because I know that even though I might have some very minor bobbles and occasionally a fairly serious one, that I can handle the situation fine and I don't have the same old feelings about it.
All right, thank you. Well, is this man cured? It depends on what you mean by cure, but he certainly has overcome his handicap. The experience of stuttering is an unpleasant one, and as a result of this, the stutterer represses what he's doing. He covers up his stuttering from himself, most of all, not just from other people. To overcome this, we stress in therapy monitoring, listening to yourself, watching yourself. In the past, we've used mirror work and audio tape recordings for this purpose. Television opens up a new dimension, the opportunity to look at yourself on video, and we'll now see our group in terms of their reactions to their earlier taping done a couple of months ago.
Here we are 3 months later, meeting as a group. We've had some change in membership. We just had an opportunity to see ourselves as we were before, to get a good look at how we sounded and at what we were doing. And I wonder what reactions. Candy, do you have any reactions to confronting yourself on this?
Yes. I noticed a big difference in my speech. Before, I was holding back and reforming in order to not stutter. But now I just forge ahead and stutter,
Now,
and it's easier.
As you're stuttering at the moment, you're still stuttering but more comfortably and more openly.
Yes.
But not as hard, not with as much struggle as you were before. Jim, you're a new member of the group. How does it feel to realize that you're not alone?
It's a great feeling to be in a group of other people with the same problem. And after watching this tape, and seeing how these other individuals are striving to overcome their trouble, it gives me a lot of courage to go on and to gradually overcome this.
We can begin to see some of the crutches that Jim uses that he's going to have to start working on as a new member of the group. You also said that you could quote Shakespeare and take a role and be fluent. Can you give us a sample of that?
Yes, Dr. Sheehan. It'll be a pleasure. Cowards die many times before their death. The valiant ne'er taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear.
Okay, far enough. You see, he has a bit of ham in him too, just as most of us who stutter. You have to become a ham in a way because you have to play so many different roles, play so many false roles. But even though you're able to be that fluent, it doesn't really affect you. When you have a fear, you still have lots of trouble in it,
Yes.
and that's all.
Yes, I do. It's something I can't explain. It just just happens. I can't. I just have this feeling, that's down the pit of my stomach that I'm going to stutter, and by golly, I do.
When you stutter, you often get the feeling that this is something that happens to you. One of the things you have to realize in therapy, this is something that we do. And I wonder, to return to our television viewing, I wonder how you felt, Maureen, as you saw yourself as of a few months ago.
Well, actually, I thought I was a lot more fluent 3 months ago than I now realize that I was.
You mean you were worse than you thought?
Yes. I realized that I was holding back a lot. My speech was very choppy, and I could see how much I tensed up, and the fact that I was grabbing onto my armchair for my dear life and everything. And now, in these past few months, I've begun to accept myself more as a stutterer.
And part of this acceptance, you might notice, Jim, is the way she says it. She's describing things that she's doing, and she's accepting some responsibility. She's doing the doing. Whereas when you were referring to it, it sounded as though this was something happening to you, and maybe this is one of the first things you can begin to learn. But George, what reactions do you have to seeing George as of a few weeks ago?
Well, I saw my nostrils flare up many times, which I didn't realize before. And
You didn't realize you were doing it?
No, I didn't. It's hard to see yourself when you're talking. So I feel much more comfortable now when I talk, and I maintain better eye contact than I used to.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel right now in this situation?
I feel I have much less tensions than I did.
You still have some. You're still working
Yes.
on some, though.
Yes.
Yeah. Leonard, what about you?
One thing that I observed